Have you ever wondered why some people effortlessly attract wealth while you struggle paycheck to paycheck despite your hard work and dedication? You look around and see others building empires, amassing fortunes, and living lives of freedom while you remain trapped in the daily grind. What's their secret? What do they know that you don't? The answer might disturb you because it contradicts everything you've been taught about success and wealth. You see, we've all been fed a comforting lie. That wealth follows fairness, that hard work guarantees reward, that playing by the rules leads to prosperity. But take a moment to look at the world around you. Does it truly operate that way? But before we dive deeper, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. The uncomfortable truth is that money doesn't obey fairness. Money obeys power. This fundamental principle governs wealth creation across history, across cultures, across every economic system. Those who understand this reality can navigate the financial world with surgical precision, while those who deny it remain eternally frustrated by their lack of progress. Has this ever happened to you? You work harder than everyone else, you follow all the advice, you save diligently. Yet wealth continues to elude you while seemingly flowing effortlessly to others who appear to do less. What you're about to discover might surprise you, even shock you. The wealthy aren't waiting patiently for opportunity to knock or for someone to recognize their hard work. They're actively engineering their success, manipulating systems, bending reality, and creating circumstances that channel wealth toward them rather than away from them. They understand that true power is taken, never given. Stay with me until the end, because what separates the financial elite from the masses isn't motivation or simple hard work. It's not about hustling harder or waking up earlier. Those are surface-level tactics that keep you running on the hamster wheel. Real wealth creation operates on a much deeper level. It follows Machiavellian principles of strategy, power, and psychological insight that few are willing to acknowledge, much less master. This isn't the comfortable, feel-good advice you'll hear in mainstream personal finance circles. This is dangerous knowledge, the kind that makes you unreadable, untouchable, and ultimately unstoppable in your pursuit of wealth. The kind that transforms you from financial prey into a predator. The principles I'm about to share have been understood and applied by the financially powerful throughout history. They operate behind the scenes, invisible to those who haven't been initiated into this way of thinking. They represent the cold, tactical strategy that governs the flow of money and resources in this world. Are you ready to abandon comfortable illusions and embrace uncomfortable realities? Are you prepared to see the world of money as it truly is, not as you wish it to be? Because once you understand these principles, you can never go back to your old way of thinking. If you're ready to continue this transformation from financial prey to wealth predator, subscribe now. Each video reveals another layer of the hidden psychology that governs wealth creation, knowledge that most will never access. Let me ask you something that might challenge your core beliefs. If wealth were truly about intelligence, why do so many brilliant minds die in poverty? If it were about luck, why do certain families maintain wealth across generations? And if talent were the deciding factor, shouldn't our most gifted artists, scientists, and thinkers be our wealthiest citizens? The hidden truth is that these common beliefs about wealth are carefully constructed illusions. They're comforting stories we tell ourselves to make sense of a system we don't fully understand. I've watched countless geniuses struggle financially while observing seemingly ordinary strategic thinkers build empires. The difference? a cold, tactical approach to the game of wealth that few are willing to acknowledge. This revelation leads us to an even more uncomfortable truth. Money is not the neutral medium of exchange we're taught to believe it is. Money is a weapon. In the hands of the weak and uninformed, it slips away like water through fingers. But in the hands of the strong, of those who understand its true nature, it multiplies, compounds, and becomes an unstoppable force. To wield this weapon effectively requires a fundamental shift in consciousness, a complete detachment from childish illusions about fairness, deservingness, and the moral nature of wealth. This detachment isn't something that happens overnight. It's a profound transformation that begins with a single decisive moment of clarity. That moment arrives when you finally break your identity as a victim in the economic game. This is the critical first step on your journey to financial sovereignty. As long as you see yourself as someone at the mercy of circumstances, the economy, your boss, the government, the market, you remain prey in a world of predators. The path to wealth begins when you stop thinking like a victim of circumstance and start developing what I call the observer mindset. This perspective allows you to step outside the game momentarily, to see the board from above, rather than as just another piece being moved. You begin to notice patterns in how others are manipulated in the money game, and more importantly, how you've been manipulated without realizing it. This shift in perspective is profoundly disorienting at first. The world you thought you understood suddenly appears as a complex system of power flows, strategic positions, and psychological triggers, designed to keep wealth moving in predictable directions, rarely toward those who simply work hard and play by the rules. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining how the average person unwittingly participates in their own financial limitation. The observer mindset reveals something shocking about human behavior in relation to money, patterns so predictable they can be exploited by those who understand them. If what I'm saying resonates with your experiences, write "I'm awake now" in the comments below. I'm curious how many of you have already begun to see these patterns in your own financial life. Look closely at the average person's approach to wealth. They wake up early, work diligently, save what little remains after bills, and hope that someday this formula will lead to prosperity. But there's a fundamental flaw in this blueprint, a critical misunderstanding that keeps them trapped in a cycle of enriching others while barely sustaining themselves. The average person believes religiously in effort, not leverage. They trust that hours invested will directly translate to wealth received. They believe in fairness rather than strategic manipulation of circumstances. They focus on maintaining appearances rather than accumulating actual power. This mindset is precisely why they remain caged in financial mediocrity, no matter how hard they work or how many hours they sacrifice. The wealthy operate from an entirely different paradigm. They understand that the journey to prosperity requires mastering certain laws, psychological principles that govern human behavior, and by extension, the flow of money. The first of these laws might surprise you with its simplicity, yet profound impact. Weaponize silence. Consider how most people approach opportunities, negotiations, or even casual conversations about money. They talk excessively. They explain, they justify, they prove their worth or knowledge. This constant need to fill the air with words isn't just a social habit, it's a devastating financial weakness. It broadcasts desperation and surrenders power in one breath. Those who truly understand wealth creation use silence as a strategic weapon. Instead of talking, begging, or proving themselves, they remain calm and measured in their speech. This calculated silence creates immense psychological pressure that makes others uncomfortable. So uncomfortable that they begin to reveal information, expose weaknesses, and offer concessions simply to break the tension. This revelation leads us to another crucial transformation on your wealth journey: becoming unreadable. Most people unknowingly broadcast their emotional state through facial expressions, body language, tone, and word choice. They display fear when markets drop, greed when opportunities arise, and insecurity when challenged. These emotional signals are like radio transmissions that financial predators can pick up instantly and use to manipulate outcomes in their favor. Join our strategic brotherhood by subscribing today. While others remain trapped in financial illusion, you'll receive advanced tactics for positioning yourself where wealth naturally flows toward you, not away from you. The unreadable person, however, becomes a mystery, impossible to predict or control. They've mastered the art of stillness, both internal and external. Their decisions come from strategic calculation rather than emotional reaction. When you remove these emotional tells from your behavior, you stop being a pawn on someone else's board and start moving pieces yourself. This mastery of emotional discipline creates something extraordinary, a presence that others can sense but never fully understand. You become like a ghost in financial interactions, impossible to read, predict, or manipulate. In a world where most people's next moves are telegraphed by their emotions, the unreadable person gains an almost supernatural advantage. The deeper truth behind this principle is that humans fear what they cannot read. We're biologically wired to seek certainty and pattern recognition. When confronted with someone whose reactions and intentions remain hidden, we become unsettled. And in that unsettled state, we often concede ground without realizing it. If you're beginning to see how these principles could transform your financial reality, type "unreadable" in the comments. I'm curious how many of you recognize the power of becoming psychologically invisible in your financial interactions. When you truly master the art of becoming unreadable, something remarkable happens. You develop a kind of immunity to the manipulation tactics that influence most people's financial decisions. Think about it. A person who cannot be read cannot be predicted. A person who cannot be predicted cannot be controlled. This transformation creates a dangerous presence in the wealth game. Dangerous not in a violent sense, but in its power to disrupt the expected flow of money and influence. The unreadable individual becomes immune to the subtle psychological triggers embedded in advertising that prompt impulse purchases. They remain unmoved by peer pressure that drives others to status consumption. They watch market trends with detached observation rather than emotional participation. When others panic sell during market dips, they calmly assess opportunity. When others rush into overvalued investments, they patiently wait for true value to emerge. This immunity comes from a profound shift in perspective, the ability to stand above the crowd rather than move within it. Imagine viewing a busy marketplace from a high vantage point. From that elevated position, you can see patterns of movement invisible to those on the ground. You notice bottlenecks before they form. You identify valuable opportunities before the crowd rushes toward them. You spot dangers while they're still distant threats. This is how true wealth is built, not by participating in crowd behavior, but by observing it from above. This elevated perspective allows for strategic positioning and precision timing. You begin to see the financial world not as a series of random events, but as predictable waves of human emotion that can be anticipated and leveraged. The revelation that accompanies this perspective is both liberating and sobering. Every emotional reaction bleeds power to someone else. The financial world operates on a zero-sum dynamic where money is constantly in motion, flowing from one party to another. When you react emotionally, whether through fear, greed, impatience, or insecurity, you create a power vacuum that someone else fills. Consider the stock market. When fear drives mass selling, who benefits? The patient buyers who acquire assets at discount prices. When greed drives buying frenzies, who profits? The calm sellers who exit at premium prices. Each emotional decision transfers wealth from the reactive to the strategic. Each impulsive choice strengthens someone else's position while weakening your own. This understanding reveals the hidden architecture behind wealth transfer. Money doesn't simply disappear during market crashes or economic downturns. It changes hands. It moves from the emotionally reactive to the strategically patient. It flows from those who follow the crowd to those who position themselves above it. The deeper insight here involves recognizing that financial markets are essentially emotional energy exchanges. They're designed to harvest reactions and convert them into wealth transfers. The masses are conditioned to respond predictably to certain triggers: fear of missing out, panic selling, euphoric buying, while the positioned few harvest the results of these reactions. This blueprint for wealth accumulation requires a fundamental rewiring of your relationship with emotional triggers. It demands you develop what ancient philosophers called apatheia, not apathy in the modern sense, but freedom from reactive emotions that cloud judgment and bleed power. If this perspective shift is changing how you view your own financial decisions, comment "Power Keeper" below. I'm interested in connecting with those who recognize how emotional discipline directly impacts financial outcomes. The financial world reveals a stark contrast in behavioral patterns that directly impact wealth accumulation. On one side, average individuals frantically chase trends, pursue get-rich-quick schemes, and jump impulsively from one opportunity to another. They operate with a scarcity mindset that drives desperate action. On the other side, the truly wealthy exhibit what I call predator's patience, the disciplined ability to wait strategically for the perfect moment to strike. This patience isn't passive. It's a highly active state of awareness, similar to a lion observing the savannah. The predator doesn't waste energy on random movement. It conserves resources, studies patterns, and waits for the precise moment when success is nearly guaranteed. While others exhaust themselves chasing every financial trend, the patient predator maintains focused vigilance, ready to move with decisive force when opportunity presents itself. This strategic patience becomes a formidable weapon in market timing. Consider how the masses respond to market volatility. They panic sell during downturns, desperately buy during upswings, and constantly react to headlines with emotional impulsivity. Meanwhile, those practicing predators' patience follow a counterintuitive path. They buy methodically when collective fear drives prices down. They hold steadfastly when uncertainty makes others abandon positions. They expand deliberately when economic contraction causes others to retreat. This patient approach captures asymmetric opportunities that impulsive behavior misses entirely. It's the financial equivalent of breathing in when others exhale, creating a natural rhythm that consistently accumulates resources rather than depleting them. The patient investor doesn't need to predict the future. They simply need to recognize the predictable patterns of human emotion that drive market cycles. The journey toward this level of strategic patience requires a profound inner transformation that few are willing to undertake. At its core lies an uncomfortable truth. Most people prioritize immediate comfort over long-term discipline. They choose the dopamine hit of instant gratification over the delayed reward of strategic restraint. They opt for the comfort of consumption rather than the temporary discomfort of capital accumulation. This comfort-seeking behavior creates invisible chains that bind people to their paychecks. The constant pursuit of lifestyle upgrading, status signaling, and immediate pleasure creates a psychological prison more effective than any physical constraint. The masses remain trapped in financial mediocrity, not because they lack opportunity, but because they lack the discipline to delay gratification and endure strategic discomfort. The wealthy, beneath their seemingly indulgent exteriors, maintain a core of iron discipline. They understand that true freedom requires initial constraint. They recognize that strategic discomfort now creates unlimited comfort later. They embrace the paradox that discipline eventually creates more pleasure than impulsive indulgence ever could. This revelation challenges the fundamental blueprint most people use to navigate financial decisions. It suggests that wealth accumulation isn't primarily about intelligence, education, or even income. It's about psychological mastery over comfort-seeking impulses that silently sabotage long-term prosperity. The battlefield for financial freedom exists not in external markets, but in internal self-regulation. If you're recognizing how comfort-seeking behaviors might be sabotaging your financial journey, type "disciplined predator" in the comments. I'm curious who among you is ready to exchange momentary comfort for lasting strategic advantage. When you begin applying these principles, weaponizing silence, becoming unreadable, and practicing predator's patience, something profound happens. You experience a fundamental transformation that separates you from ordinary financial existence. You stop being just another player in the money game and start becoming untouchable, someone whose financial trajectory operates above the limitations that constrain others. This untouchable quality emerges from detachment, not from goals or ambition, but from the comforting illusions that keep most people financially trapped. You detach from the illusion that fairness governs wealth. You detach from the belief that hard work automatically equals reward. You detach from the idea that the financial system is designed to help you prosper. This detachment doesn't make you cynical. It makes you clear-eyed, strategic, and increasingly immune to manipulation. The awakening that follows this detachment often reveals an uncomfortable truth that challenges our cultural programming. Substantial wealth isn't earned through simple effort. It's taken through strategic positioning and power dynamics. This revelation initially feels wrong because we've been conditioned to equate wealth with virtue, to believe that prosperity flows naturally to those who deserve it through hard work or moral superiority. Yet, the evidence contradicts this comforting narrative. History shows repeatedly that wealth accumulates not to the hardest workers, but to those who position themselves strategically in the flow of value. This doesn't mean honest work has no place. It means that work alone, without strategic positioning, rarely creates substantial wealth. The mindset shift required here is substantial. Instead of asking, "How can I work harder?" the strategically positioned ask, "Where can I stand so that value naturally flows to me?" This paradigm shift transforms your entire approach to wealth creation. You stop thinking like a laborer and start thinking like an architect of systems. Positioning becomes your primary focus, the art of placing yourself at critical junctions where resources, information, and value must flow. Consider how true wealth operates. One landlord collects rent from dozens of tenants who work daily to generate that payment. One investor captures the value created by hundreds of employees. One platform owner extracts fees from thousands of users and creators. In each case, the wealth accumulator isn't working harder than those paying them. They're simply better positioned. They've created or identified a position where other people's efforts naturally flow upward, creating passive value capture systems rather than trading time for money. This positioning doesn't require deception. It requires vision to see where value flows and courage to place yourself at those critical junctions. The revelation that truly transforms your financial journey is recognizing that you can deliberately engineer these positions rather than hoping to stumble upon them. You can analyze value chains, identify leverage points, and systematically position yourself where effort to reward ratios dramatically favor you. This strategic approach creates wealth acceleration that linear effort cannot match. This perspective reframes your entire financial education. Instead of accumulating more credentials or working longer hours, you begin studying power structures, value flows, and strategic positioning. You analyze how wealth moves through systems and identify the pressure points where small inputs create outsized returns. If this strategic positioning concept has shifted your thinking about wealth creation, write "position is power" in the comments. I'm fascinated to connect with those who understand that where you stand matters more than how hard you work. To fully grasp how strategic positioning creates wealth, you must understand what might be the most powerful force in financial dynamics: the law of leverage. Look no further than conventional employment to see this principle in crystal clear operation. A worker produces value through their labor, creating products, delivering services, solving problems. Yet they receive only a fraction of that value in payment, while the remainder flows upward to those positioned above them. This isn't about moral judgment. It's about structural reality. The employer didn't necessarily work harder or smarter. They simply positioned themselves where value must pass through their hands before reaching its destination. This positioning creates an automatic wealth flow that operates regardless of individual effort. This revelation transforms how you view work itself, not as the path to wealth, but as the mechanism others use to extract wealth from your efforts. Machiavelli observed that people are by nature changeable. It is easy to persuade them of something, but difficult to keep them in that persuasion. This insight reveals another dimension of strategic wealth creation. Individual efforts, loyalties, and even obedience are inherently unstable. People change jobs, lose motivation, develop new interests. But when you control the system rather than relying on individuals, these human inconsistencies become irrelevant. True power comes from controlling the architecture through which value must flow, not from controlling people directly. When you own the platform, the property, the protocol, or the pathway, individual participants can come and go while your wealth accumulation continues uninterrupted. This systems-level thinking represents a profound paradigm shift from how most people approach financial growth. The widespread application of leverage explains wealth concentration patterns that otherwise seem mysterious. Why do landlords grow increasingly wealthy while tenants work their entire lives paying rent until death? Leverage. Why do investors consistently outperform even as market participants come and go? Leverage. Why do corporations extract billions from customers who simultaneously complain about their practices yet continue using their products? Again, leverage. This revelation illuminates the hidden architecture behind generational wealth. Families that maintain wealth across centuries aren't necessarily smarter or more talented. They've mastered the art of creating self-perpetuating leverage systems. They own assets that produce without their direct effort. They control access points that others must pass through. They maintain positions that naturally capture value regardless of who creates it. The awakening that accompanies this understanding can be jarring. Most people have been conditioned to view wealth primarily through the lens of merit or effort rather than through the lens of positioning and leverage. This blind spot keeps them trapped in patterns of trading time for money, while others capture the exponential value they create. The path forward requires a fundamental reimagining of your relationship to wealth creation. Instead of asking, "How can I make more money?" start asking, Where can I position myself so that value automatically flows to me? Instead of focusing solely on increasing your skills, focus on increasing your leverage. Instead of selling your time directly, create systems where your time creates ongoing returns. Through strategic positioning, this blueprint for wealth creation operates on an entirely different plane than conventional financial advice. It's not about budgeting or coupon cutting. It's about architectural thinking, designing or identifying positions where small inputs create disproportionate, ongoing outputs. If this perspective on leverage and system design has opened your eyes to new possibilities, write "architect, not laborer" in the comments. I'm interested in connecting with those who are ready to stop trading hours for dollars and start designing wealth systems. The most devastating financial trap most people fall into is deceptively simple. They trade their irreplaceable hours for money. This transaction seems logical on the surface, yet it contains a fatal flaw that guarantees perpetual financial limitation. Time, unlike almost every other resource, cannot multiply. Once you've sold an hour, it's gone forever. No matter how efficiently you sell your time or how premium a rate you command, you remain fundamentally limited by the finite nature of hours in a day. This revelation exposes why most high-income professionals still face financial constraints despite earning substantial salaries. They've simply upgraded their cage, trading time for more money, but still trapped in the same fundamental equation. The wealthy operate on an entirely different paradigm. They don't trade in hours, they trade in systems. They create or acquire positions where resources naturally flow toward them whether they're actively working or not. Consider this profound metamorphosis, the shift from worker to trap setter. Workers exchange effort for compensation directly. They perform a task and receive payment. Trap setters design mechanisms that capture value continuously without requiring their constant presence. They establish assets, platforms, or positions that function like sophisticated financial traps, accumulating resources while they sleep, travel, or focus on setting even more traps. This hunter's mindset represents a complete reversal of conventional financial thinking. Instead of chasing paychecks, you begin creating capture systems. Instead of selling your life in hourly increments, you build mechanisms that accumulate value automatically. This paradigm shift transforms every aspect of how you approach wealth creation, from seeking better employment to engineering better traps. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining perhaps the most counterintuitive principle of wealth accumulation: narrative control. Most people believe money flows to superior products, innovative services, or the hardest workers. But this assumption crumbles under careful observation. Throughout history, wealth has consistently flowed not to the best offerings, but to the best stories. Human beings are fundamentally narrative creatures. We make decisions based not on objective reality, but on the stories we believe about reality. Those who master the art of shaping these narratives gain extraordinary power over the direction of financial resources. This isn't manipulation in the negative sense. It's an acknowledgement of how human psychology actually functions, rather than how we pretend it functions. Consider the most valuable companies in the world. Are they objectively providing the most essential services or highest quality products? Often not. What they've mastered is storytelling, creating compelling narratives that shape perception, desire, and behavior. They understand that humans don't buy what something is. They buy what they believe it is. They don't value things based on objective utility. They value things based on the stories attached to them. This insight transforms marketing from a superficial activity into a fundamental wealth creation mechanism. The masters of narrative don't sell features. They sell identity, belonging, transformation, and meaning. They don't just describe what their offering does. They craft stories about who their customers become through association with their brand, product, or service. When you fully grasp this principle, you stop asking, "How can I make my product better?" and start asking, "How can I make my story more compelling?" This shift doesn't diminish quality, it simply acknowledges that quality alone rarely determines financial outcomes. If you're beginning to see how narrative shapes financial reality, type "story as currency" below. I'm curious, who among you recognizes the profound power of storytelling in directing the flow of money? The deeper you look into human behavior, the more you uncover a profound truth that shapes economies, religions, and entire civilizations. Humans follow belief far more powerfully than they follow logic. This isn't a cynical perspective, it's simply an acknowledgement of our fundamental nature as meaning-making creatures. We operate primarily through narrative frameworks, not rational calculations. This psychological reality explains why religions command trillions in assets despite offering intangible rewards. It clarifies why luxury brands extract premium prices for products whose functional value may be identical to cheaper alternatives. It illuminates how politicians amass power and fortune through carefully crafted stories rather than objective policy outcomes. These entities haven't necessarily created superior objective value. They've mastered the art of shaping the lens through which masses perceive reality. The revelation that transforms your approach to wealth creation is recognizing that narrative doesn't need to be true to be effective. It simply needs to be believed. The moment you grasp this distinction, you unlock a dimension of influence that operates beyond conventional metrics. Look carefully at any substantial wealth concentration, and you'll find at its core a narrative that people have accepted as reality. Once people accept a story about a brand, an investment, a leader, or an opportunity, they willingly direct their resources towards supporting that narrative. They give their money, their loyalty, their advocacy, and sometimes even their labor, not because they've been forced, but because they've been persuaded. This persuasion happens not at the logical level, but at the deeper level of identity and meaning. Consider how cryptocurrency valuations surge, not based on current utility, but on collective belief in future potential. Examine how entertainment franchises transform simple stories into billion-dollar empires through narrative extension. Observe how personal brands convert ordinary individuals into influential figures commanding premium compensation. In each case, the narrative precedes and enables the financial outcome rather than following from it. This insight isn't about deception, it's about understanding the actual mechanism through which human value assignment operates. When you recognize that perception shapes reality in financial matters, you stop fighting this principle and start working with it deliberately. You begin crafting compelling stories that align with your offerings rather than hoping objective quality will somehow speak for itself. The thread connecting all these Machiavellian wealth principles reveals something profound about human psychology. Each principle, from weaponized silence to narrative control, works by identifying predictable human weaknesses and converting them into leverage points for wealth accumulation. Silence works because humans are uncomfortable with conversational voids. Unreadability works because humans crave predictability. Patience works because humans tend toward impulsivity. Positioning works because humans follow established pathways. Narrative works because humans seek meaning before truth. This pattern recognition represents a blueprint for wealth creation that operates beneath the surface of conventional financial thinking. It suggests that the most direct path to prosperity isn't through developing more skills or working harder hours, but through understanding human psychology more deeply and positioning yourself to leverage its predictable patterns. The masters of wealth don't fight human nature. They align with it. They don't resist psychological tendencies. They redirect them. They don't judge emotional reactions. They anticipate and channel them toward predetermined outcomes. If you've recognized how these principles transform weakness into wealth, write alchemist in the comments. I'm curious who among you sees the pattern of psychological transmutation that underlies financial mastery. Beneath the veneer of luxury and abundance that surrounds the wealthy lies a paradox few recognize. These seemingly indulgent lives are built on a foundation of disciplined sacrifice. While the masses see only the external trappings, the mansions, vehicles, and lavish experiences, they miss the internal architecture of restraint that made such acquisition possible. The wealthy appear to live without limits, but their journey to prosperity required precise limitations they imposed first upon themselves. This revelation challenges our cultural narrative about wealth and discipline. We're conditioned to view the wealthy as indulgent and the working class as disciplined, yet beneath the surface, the opposite pattern often emerges. The wealthy practice ruthless self-control in areas invisible to outside observers. They control their emotional reactions when others would explode. They maintain strategic focus when others would be distracted. They delay gratification when immediate pleasure beckons. The transformation begins with this counterintuitive understanding. Before you can control resources, markets, or others, you must first master control of yourself. Wealth demands the sacrifice of comfort, not forever, but during the critical accumulation phase that most never endure long enough to break through. This sacrifice isn't about asceticism, it's about strategic restraint in service of greater power. Machiavelli warned that a prince must sometimes act against mercy, faith, and even humanity to preserve power. This principle extends to wealth creation in ways that may challenge conventional moral frameworks. Those who accumulate substantial wealth often make decisions that prioritize strategic advantage over commonly accepted values of fairness, transparency, or sentimentality. This doesn't mean abandoning ethics entirely. It means developing the flexibility to recognize when rigid adherence to conventional morality creates vulnerability in competitive environments. The wealthy understand that different contexts demand different approaches. They recognize when mercy creates weakness, when transparency surrenders advantage, and when sentimentality clouds judgment in crucial moments. This moral flexibility represents perhaps the most difficult metamorphosis required for wealth accumulation. It demands the capacity to evaluate situations based on outcomes rather than abstract principles, to prioritize effectiveness over appearance, and to make decisions others would find impossible due to their rigid moral constraints. Yet this flexibility must be balanced with precision control. The truly wealthy appear calm amidst chaos because they've mastered walking the razor's edge between ruthlessness and restraint. They know exactly how far to push without creating collapse or backlash. They understand the delicate equilibrium between aggressive action and strategic patience. This balance explains why the wealthy often appear unflappable even in crisis. They've developed an internal compass that constantly calibrates between opposing forces, between action and restraint, between transparency and mystery, between ruthlessness and relationship. While others swing wildly between extremes, the wealth-minded maintain this dynamic equilibrium that keeps them one step ahead of potential collapse. The journey toward this balance represents a profound evolution in consciousness. It requires developing a heightened awareness of consequences, an ability to operate beyond emotional reactivity, and a capacity to make calculated decisions when others would be overwhelmed by moral uncertainty. If you recognize how this balanced approach to power might transform your financial decisions, write calibrated force in the comments. I'm interested in connecting with those who understand The true power lies not in unbridled aggression or passive restraint, but in the masterful balance between them. As powerful as these Machiavellian principles are, they carry hidden dangers when applied without awareness. Every tool of power contains within it a potential shadow that can undermine your progress if left unacknowledged. This shadow side represents perhaps the most overlooked aspect of wealth creation, the ways in which strengths transform into weaknesses when pushed beyond their optimal boundaries. The weaponized silence that creates strategic advantage can, when overextended, become isolation that cuts you off from crucial information flows. The unreadability that shields you from manipulation can evolve into paranoia that prevents necessary trust and collaboration. The predator's patience that times markets perfectly can degrade into paralyzing inaction that misses opportunities entirely. The leverage that multiplies your efforts can become catastrophic collapse when not maintained with disciplined attention. Recognizing these shadow aspects requires a level of self-awareness that most never develop. The masters of wealth creation maintain vigilant awareness of these boundaries, constantly calibrating their approach to extract maximum advantage while avoiding the tipping point where strengths become vulnerabilities. This calibration explains why the truly wealthy appear to have an almost intuitive sense of when to advance and when to retreat. They've learned to recognize the early warning signs of principal distortion. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining what might be the most difficult revelation for those conditioned by conventional financial thinking. Money doesn't flow to those who deserve it. It flows to those who position themselves to take it. This fundamental reality challenges our cultural programming about merit, fairness, and just rewards. We want to believe that financial prosperity comes to those who earn it through virtue, effort, or contribution. Yet historical and contemporary evidence consistently demonstrates that money gravitates not toward desert, but toward strategic positioning. This doesn't mean contribution and value creation are irrelevant. They're essential components of sustainable wealth. But the mechanism that directs financial flows isn't some cosmic justice system that rewards the deserving. It's a complex network of power dynamics, positioning, and strategic action. The wealthy understand that wealth capture requires deliberate engineering rather than patient waiting for deserved rewards. They design systems that naturally funnel resources toward their position regardless of relative merit. They create extraction points that operate independently of subjective notions of fairness or desert. They recognize that while creation produces value, capture determines who benefits from that value. This recognition fundamentally transforms your approach to financial empowerment. You stop expecting rewards proportionate to effort and start designing structures that capture disproportionate value regardless of relative contribution. You shift from playing a merit game that doesn't actually govern wealth distribution to playing the positioning game that does. The ultimate revelation that crystallizes these principles into a coherent framework is this: wealth accumulation isn't a fair contest. It's war. Not violence in the literal sense, but conflict in its strategic essence, with territory to be taken, positions to be defended, and resources to be captured through deliberate action rather than passive hope. In this theater of financial warfare, hesitation often means death. Decisive action, even with incomplete information, frequently determines outcomes more than perfect analysis without execution. If this warfare perspective has transformed how you view your financial journey, write strategic combatant in the comments. I'm curious who among you recognizes that wealth accumulation requires the strategic mindset of a general rather than the passive hope of a civilian. Understanding the fundamental differences in how the wealthy and the poor approach value creation reveals another transformative principle: the law of substitution. Consider the default substitution most people make. They trade labor for money in a direct, linear exchange. They substitute time and effort for compensation, creating an inherently limited wealth ceiling. The wealthy operate through entirely different substitution patterns. They substitute ideas for labor, allowing one concept to generate value repeatedly without additional effort. They substitute influence for action, leveraging others' energy rather than depleting their own. They substitute perception for reality, creating value through belief rather than through tangible production. These strategic substitutions function as wealth multipliers, mechanisms that break the one-to-one relationship between effort and reward. A single idea, properly positioned, can generate exponential returns compared to direct labor. A moment of influence properly applied can mobilize far more action than personal exertion. A perception skillfully crafted can command higher value than objective utility alone. This substitution principle explains why some individuals generate extraordinary wealth with seemingly minimal effort. They're not working less. They're substituting more effectively. Consider this revealing example. One man digs a ditch for a day and earns a wage. Another man organizes 10 people to dig 10 ditches and earns 10 times as much without touching a shovel. Which approach demonstrates greater intelligence, the direct laborer or the strategic substituter? Machiavelli himself advised rulers never to rely solely on their own arms, but to use others whenever possible. This same principle governs wealth creation. If you're always substituting your own time for money, you remain trapped in limitation. The law of substitution connects directly to another principle that governs value perception, the law of illusion. This principle reveals that people don't buy what something is, they buy what they believe it is. Their perception of value, not objective reality, determines what they're willing to pay. This explains why a diamond, essentially a carbon rock, commands extraordinary prices, why ordinary fabric transforms into luxury when bearing the right logo, and why digital assets with no physical form can sell for millions. Masters of illusion understand this psychological reality and leverage it to create perceived value that commands premium prices regardless of intrinsic worth. They recognize that humans operate primarily through belief systems rather than objective evaluation. They don't fight this tendency, they align with it by creating compelling illusions that shape perception and drive valuation upward. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by examining what might be the most misunderstood wealth principle, the law of exploitation. The term itself often triggers moral resistance, yet in its purest form, exploitation simply means identifying unused value and extracting it efficiently. This doesn't necessarily involve exploiting people directly. It can mean exploiting timing, inefficiencies, fear, overreaction, or wasted resources that others overlook. The wealthy consistently identify gaps in markets, weaknesses in systems, and opportunities in volatility that others miss. When markets crash, they exploit mass fear by purchasing quality assets at discount prices. When attention becomes the scarcest resource, they exploit this by capturing and monetizing it through compelling content. When inefficiencies create waste, they exploit this by creating streamlined alternatives that capture the difference. This principle transforms how you view opportunity itself. You begin seeing potential value in situations that others perceive as problems, threats, or disruptions. You develop an eye for the extractable worth hidden within market fluctuations, human psychology, and systemic inefficiencies. If you're beginning to see untapped opportunities around you that others miss, write "Value Hunter" in the comments. I'm curious, who among you is developing this crucial ability to spot extractable value in overlooked corners of the market, the power dynamics that separate financial prey from predators often hinge on a principle rarely discussed in conventional wealth education: the law of withholding. Observe how the average person operates in professional and personal interactions. They instinctively overshare, revealing their thoughts, plans, limitations, and emotions freely. This transparency may seem virtuous, but it creates a devastating strategic disadvantage. Each revelation becomes a vulnerability that more strategic players can exploit. The wealthy approach: information as precious currency, not to be spent carelessly, but invested strategically. They practice the art of partial disclosure, revealing only what serves their interests while maintaining an aura of mystery around their true intentions, limitations, and next moves. This calculated withholding creates a fascinating psychological dynamic where others feel compelled to fill the space with their own revelations, concessions, and vulnerabilities. Consider the negotiation table, the setting, where this principle becomes most visible. The amateur negotiator arrives eager to demonstrate knowledge, establish rapport, and secure agreement. They reveal their bottom line, their timeline constraints, their eagerness for deal completion. The master negotiator, by contrast, reveals nothing except what strategically advances their position. They listen, they observe. They allow silence to create pressure that the other side feels compelled to relieve through concession. This withholding creates something beyond tactical advantage. It generates mystique, an intangible quality that paradoxically increases perceived value. Humans innately desire what remains slightly beyond complete understanding. By withholding total transparency, you create a perception of depth that often commands greater respect, interest, and eventually financial premium. While each principle we've explored holds significant power individually, the true mastery of wealth creation comes from combining them into a coherent system. Silence creates pressure that makes others reveal themselves. Unreadability prevents others from anticipating your next move. Patience allows you to act at optimal moments rather than reacting emotionally. Leverage multiplies your impact without multiplying your effort. Narrative shapes how others perceive value. Substitution creates wealth multipliers. Illusion drives premium pricing. Exploitation identifies overlooked value. Withholding maintains your strategic advantage. When these principles operate in concert rather than isolation, they create something far more powerful than their sum, a comprehensive operating system for wealth accumulation that fundamentally transforms your relationship with money, opportunity, and human psychology. The ultimate metamorphosis this system enables is nothing less than an evolution in consciousness, transforming you from financial prey into predator. This transformation doesn't happen externally at first, but internally through a profound shift in perception. You develop what might be called predator vision, the ability to see weaknesses, opportunities, and patterns invisible to those still operating with prey consciousness. While others stumble through financial landscapes, reacting emotionally to apparent threats and opportunities, you move with deliberate precision, seeing the board from above. You notice the emotional tells that telegraph others' next moves. You identify the pressure points where small inputs create disproportionate outcomes. You recognize the narratives that shape perception and drive behavior. You position yourself where value naturally flows toward you rather than away from you. This elevated perspective fundamentally changes how you interact with the world. You're no longer one of the herd, moved by external forces beyond your control. You've become the force that moves others, not through direct manipulation, but through strategic positioning and psychological understanding that creates natural influence. If you're feeling this shift in perspective beginning to take root, type evolved consciousness in the comments. I'm fascinated to connect with those who recognize this isn't just about financial techniques, but about a fundamental transformation in how you perceive and navigate reality. You've now been initiated into a way of seeing the world that few will ever access. The principles we've explored: silence, unreadability, patience, leverage, narrative, substitution, illusion, exploitation, and withholding, aren't just theoretical concepts. They're psychological weapons that, when mastered, fundamentally transform your relationship with wealth creation. What separates those who merely understand these principles from those who embody them is consistent application. Begin implementing these strategies in your daily interactions, in conversations, negotiations, business dealings, even casual relationships. Notice how people respond differently when you weaponize silence instead of filling every void. Observe the power you gain when you become unreadable rather than broadcasting your next move. Experience how opportunities multiply when you position yourself strategically rather than working harder in the wrong position. Remember, wealth isn't about working harder than everyone else. It's about seeing what others can't see and positioning yourself where value naturally flows toward you. It's about becoming the architect of systems rather than remaining trapped inside someone else's design. If this message resonated with you on a level deeper than intellectual curiosity, if you felt something shift in your perception of how wealth actually works, join our brotherhood of strategic thinkers. Subscribe to this channel to continue your evolution from financial prey to predator. Each video builds upon these principles, taking you deeper into the psychology of power and the mechanics of wealth creation. For those who've traveled this far with me, leave the phrase "predator evolved" in the comments. I personally read every comment, and I'm particularly interested in connecting with those who recognize the profound transformation these principles can create. If you found value in these revelations, a simple like creates ripples that extend these ideas to others ready for this awakening. Not everyone is prepared for these truths, but for those who are, this knowledge can be the dividing line between perpetual struggle and strategic prosperity. There's a video right here that explores how to apply these Machiavellian principles specifically to business negotiations. Click and continue this journey with me there as we transform theory into tactical application that produces real-world results. The question now isn't whether these principles work. History has proven their effectiveness across centuries. The question is whether you'll have the courage to apply them consistently enough to break free from financial mediocrity and step into the rarefied world of those who don't just participate in the money game, but control it.